dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
In this video, I'm going to show two clips. One from Stephen Fry, who claims that God must be evil if he does exist. And another clip from Professor John Lennox of Oxford University, who addresses this issue. It's an issue which is something that all of us have probably come across. People ask us about or claim or use to oppose a belief in God. Even if you are someone who believes in God, even if you do have a faith, it doesn't take away the difficulty of some aspects of this question. Let's watch Stephen Fry.
Suppose it's all true and you walk up to the pearly gates and you are confronted by God. What will Stephen Fry say to him, her, or it?
I will basically, what's known as Theodicy, I think. I'll say, bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? That's what I would say.
For someone who doesn't believe in God, it seems very personal, doesn't it? I would have thought that if you don't believe in God, that it would be a bit more sort of disconnected and it wouldn't come out in such a visceral way, but...
And you think you're going to get in on that?
No, but I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to get in on his terms. They're wrong. Now, if I died and it was Pluto, Hades, and if it was the 12 Greek gods, then I would have more truck with it, because the Greeks they didn't pretend not to be human in their appetites and in their capriciousness and in their unreasonableness. They didn't present themselves as being all-seeing, all-wise, all-kind, all-beneficent. Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac, utter maniac, totally selfish. We have to spend our life on our knees thanking him? What kind of God would do that?
Our response would be, no, we don't have to. That is actually the whole point, is that God gave us free will. We want to. When we realise who God is, how worthy he is of worship, that's where that comes from.
Yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has in it insects whose whole life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. They eat outwards from the eyes. Why? Why did you do that to us? You could easily have made a creation in which that didn't exist. It is simply not acceptable. So, atheism is not just about not believing there's a God, but on the assumption that there is one. What kind of God is he? It's perfectly apparent that he is monstrous, utterly monstrous, and deserves no respect whatsoever. The moment you banish him, your life becomes simpler, purer, cleaner, more worth living, in my opinion.
So his objection seems to be that if there's these evil things in the world, then that means that God must be evil. And although that is a fair question that needs to be explored, I think that equally you need to use the same logic and apply it. If there are good things in this earth, and I'm sure Stephen Fry would have to admit there are magnificent, beautiful, amazing things in this earth, in this world, then do you not have to come to the same conclusion that maybe that God is a good God? There's no doubt a problem of evil. There always has been throughout, recent history, this debate around evil and an all-loving God. And so in order to answer this question, we're now going to watch a clip from Dr. John Lennox.
Around the world, I find these days, and it's very interesting, even this week, I've been asked to speak on the problem of evil twice out of 4. Because I find that people are hurting, they're looking for answers, and they find their friends suffering either with a natural catastrophe like a brain tumour, or they're raped or they're abused in some way, and they're desperately trying to come to terms with it. I find it a very hard problem. It's the hardest problem I face, and I do not think atheism solves it, except in a fairly trivial way. It says, well, that's just how the world is. But you see, what atheism doesn't do is it doesn't remove the pain and the suffering. And I'm faced very often with people who've just been given a few weeks to live or months to live. And they want answers. They want to put this into a big picture, and I can understand that. And if I didn't feel there was any way into this question, I wouldn't sit here for a millisecond. I wouldn't sit here for a millisecond. Because my heart really goes out to people who are on the rough end of suffering.
As a priest, I've had to sit next to people and listen to them as they tell me of their child who they've lost, and see the pain that they are going through, the sense of evil that has taken place. And it's hard to come up with answers. It's very rare, I think, that someone is looking for a rational, logical answer. Usually what people are asking when they are asking the question, how can suffering exist, is how can I believe in a God when this suffering has personally happened in my life? This suffering that I've experienced or seen stops me. It puts a barrier between me believing in a God who is real and a God who supposedly loves me.
The problem with our world is that we can argue about God being all good, all powerful, and if he was this, he could do that, and none of us has ever been satisfied with that kind of an argument, as I think you were essentially pointing out. And that's because when we've done all the philosophical arguing, we're presented with two things that I call beauty and barbed wire. We're presented with a mixed world and a mixed picture. And we have to try to make sense of it. Now, I would claim that atheism superficially appears to have a solution, but deep down has no solution because it leaves the suffering. The suffering doesn't go away, but it removes all hope.
Christianity never promises, and I think Dr. John Lennox proposes this in a really great way. It doesn't ever promise a pain-free life. It doesn't ever disregard the fact that there is suffering in this life. Instead, what it does is it gives us a picture of who God is in that, and how does he deal with a world that does have evil and suffering in it.
Could God not have made a world in which this kind of thing doesn't happen? Couldn't he have made a world in which human beings don't do these awful things to one another? Well, the answer to the latter question is, of course he could. We can make such worlds. They're called robotic worlds, but there are no humans in them. We're wishing ourselves out of existence if we say, could God not have made a world in which people are incapable of doing evil? Because evil is the flip side of the capacity to do good. And so the deep question for me is this. Granted that there's beauty and barbed wire, is there any evidence anywhere in the universe that there is a God who could be trusted with it? And my very brief answer, Betsy, to that is this. That at the heart of Christianity, there is a cross. And whatever that tells you, if the central claim of Christianity is correct, that Jesus is God incarnate, then that's God on a cross. And I ask myself the question, what's God doing on a cross? Well, one thing it tells you is that God has not remained distant from the problem of human suffering, but has himself become part of it. Now, if that were the end of the story, I would have nowhere to go. But it's not the end of the story. The central evidence for the truth of Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And that opens up the huge possibility that ultimately justice is going to be done. And when we're talking about ethics and morality, this, to my mind, is the most important factor in the situation, that justice is going to be done. And I put it to Richard Dawkins, that just is the first thing that comes into my head. And he said, well, I fight for justice in this life. I said, so do I, but Richard, you've no ultimate hope of justice. So that the vast majority of people who've ever lived never had justice in this life. And there's no future existence for them to get justice in, so they're never going to get justice. And their cry for justice from the gas chambers of Auschwitz or anywhere else is proved to be an illusion. I simply don't believe that. And I believe there's evidence that the contrary is true. There is a God who will ultimately do fairness.
The claim there is that atheism doesn't actually have the answer. It doesn't remove the suffering, but it actually removes all of the hope that Christianity offers. Who is the God, and how does he deal with a world that does have evil and suffering in it. Well, how he deals with that is that he becomes present. He becomes close to us. He is intimate and close by. He is with us in the suffering. That is the picture. That is the reality of what an all-loving God is. And that there is an ultimate hope. I think that was really well laid out. That actually there wouldn't be much to say here from a Christian point of view, would there, if actually the answer was, yeah, at the end of this life where there's a lot of suffering and some goodness, you die and that's it. That's not what Christianity says. Christianity offers the ultimate hope, that there is a life to come after this, and that there is hope that is offered in that life. So there we have it, 2 videos which pose a question and I think give a good way to an answer of why there is suffering. Is God evil? It does address that problem. Comment below, let me know what you think. I would love to engage with you and have a conversation. Like and subscribe. You've been watching Mr. Priest, and I'll see you very soon. Bye bye.